Oh, hi there. This is MP Fitzgerald, author of A Happy Bureaucracy, and I'm pretending to play the jazz piano. You know, advertisements were invented by the devil to make Ayn Rand happy, and no one wants to make Ayn Rand happy. But audio production is expensive, so to keep commercials off this podcast, I've got all 3 ebooks in the Happy Bureaucracy series rolled into one for the price of a single book, which honestly is the best way to support this podcast. Just check the description for a link and tell your friends about the crazy shit you have been listening to have less friends. Thanks. And now for something completely different.
A Happy Bureaucracy by M.P. Fitzgerald. Narrated by Gary Bennett. Author's note: strewn between drug use, groin malice, and cursing on a level tantamount to sacrilege are gratuitous mentions of bureaucracy. These bureaucratic references may not be for the weak of heart. Chapter 4. There are 3 rules of the road. They aren't particularly hard to remember, nor are they mired in wit. To women like Rabia, they were taught at a young age instead of nursery rhymes. They were taught alongside the 10 Commandments. But the rules of the road had more utility, and they had brevity on their side. Rule number 1: do not drive at night. Of course, knowing your lessons and learning your lessons are 2 different things. Rabia Duke, consummate professional and former sheriff of one of the largest United Wastes caravans, she learned this lesson early. While Arthur was mopping the floors of the IRS bunker, Rabia rode in a modified big rig with her mother. The truck, which was as much a home as it was transportation, was the only privilege she had growing up. Considering that she was a black girl in the American wasteland, any kind of privilege was held on to with grit and desperation. The United States was a cruel, racist, and misogynistic place before the bombs fell. By the time Rabia was riding shotgun in a truck covered in sheet metal armor, counting bullets for her mother, the United Wastes had become a cruel, racist, and misogynistic playground. She was already the least important type of person in America, and that was before she knew that she liked women as much as she liked men. Most first-generation wasters were illiterate, so Rabia's mother saw to it that her daughter would not be among them. Their caravan, like many other collectives in the post-apocalypse, was run by a shepherd who had more in common with cult leaders than he did priests. It was important to Rabia's mother that Rabia was able to interpret the Bible for herself, instead of relying on the feverish spit that came out of the shepherd's mouth. This, it would turn out, would be her mother's greatest mistake. At the age of 11, when she would learn her first lesson of the road, Rabia Duke discovered the book Hell's Angels. The long hours on the road were boring, and she'd found the ill-gotten book while she and her mother scavenged for canned food among the rubble of man. It was the only non-fiction book she had ever read that resembled the world around her. She was taught to wield a gun for hunting and protection. She was taught to wield the written word to obey the will of God. But instead, she played with the words of Thompson and Bukowski, and she played with the safety off. Dr. Thompson was her favorite. He seemed like a perfectly rational and tempered person compared to the savages that roamed the roads. This little girl, her only toys a mixed bag of crayons and a Geiger counter, related to a gonzo journalist better than any of God's chosen people. Hell, they even had the same surname half of the time Thompson did something terribly illegal. It was Hell's Angels that she was reading when her mother told her to lock her doors. Some of the men were drinking. Stupid with liquor and emboldened by the full moon, they had decided that it was a perfect time for motorcycle jousting. Rabia protested. Motorcycle jousting was her favorite spectator pastime. Why should she miss it just because it was dark out? Her mother told her to watch the horizon. The sound of motorcycle engines had nothing to compete with during the night, their headlights like miniature suns piercing the darkness. The men had unwittingly announced their presence to predators. The raiders came with all of Thompson's madness and all of Old Testament God's fury and cruelty. The consequences of breaking the road's first rule were on full display. It was as if the Hells Angels had come screaming out of the pages of her book to bring the second apocalypse to the world. Her mother kept her still and quiet. They hid behind the front seats in total darkness. Robbie's mother could cover her daughter's mouth to keep her from crying, but she could not also cover her ears to protect her from the screaming. The raiders only tried to get into the heavily armored rig twice, once with brute force and once with a Molotov cocktail. Neither worked. Robbia survived her first lesson that night, without sleep or hope. Rule number 2. You scavenge for yourself. This was a rule that her mother broke often. It was a simple calculus with no room for empathy. What you found was yours unless you wanted to starve. Like most children of the United Wastes, Robbia learned to scavenge the moment she could walk without falling. It should have been then that her mother stopped providing for her. When Robbia found no food for herself, but still ate from her mother's bounty, she needed only to see the anguished face of her starving mother. This lesson needed no grand slaughter to make itself clear. Care for others, and you will suffer. Yet the lesson repeated every now and then. Rain fell like murky spit on the irradiated dust the day she got her first period. This, according to her mother, was lucky. It gave them an excuse to hide inside the rig. The men had begun to notice her. Her pants were ruined, and the stain was something that the shepherd would want to talk about. The shepherd was always looking for another sister wife. While the hateful rain turned dust into mud, Robbia's mother scavenged for tampons and replacement clothing. Robbia hid in the rig, confused, ashamed, and frightened. Her mother instructed her to read Leviticus, but instead she read Generation of Swine. Her childhood had never properly begun in the United Wastes, but now it looked as though it had come to an abrupt end. Lesson 2 was not just a survival calculus. No. Lesson 2 was also practical. Her mother came back with tampons, sure, but that was not a problem. But she also came back with a dress. Robbia hated dressing girly. That day, Robbia learned that if you want to dress yourself, you scavenge for yourself. She grew, but she stayed short. While her mother towered above some of the men at 6 feet, Robbia peaked at 5'5". She grew in other places, though, and her mother told her that she was beautiful. The men said things that would make even Dr. Thompson feel violated. Wearing a dress was a bad idea. It was the last nice thing that Robbia let her mother do for her. Well, that was, until she met Melody. Lesson 3. Never trade with slavers. Even though it shouldn't have been, this one was hard learned. Blue eyes and warm smiles can affect a girl's judgment. Robbia didn't like to dress girly, but, well, she liked it when others did. And Melody? Melody wore dresses better than she ever could. Robbia's mother had been dead 2 years since that lesson. Robbia had learned to fight better than most men, and was quicker to pull the trigger, too. Her mother did her best to raise her well, despite the challenges of the United Wastes. She did her best to impart the important lessons. Robbia ignored the ancient texts of Luke and John, and drank, smoked, and cursed better than the men she killed. She liked her girls as much as she liked her boys, assuming that the boys weren't bleeding psychopaths. There was much about her that disappointed her mother. Her mother would have preferred a different type of daughter, but at least she imparted the 3 rules of the road to her before she died. Those rules were now deeply instilled. About the author. M.P. Fitzgerald is an author and humorist dedicated to injecting the feverish gonzo style into fiction. You can get Memos from the Wasteland, which is the official prequel to this book, free. It contains hilariously bleak office drama, Rabbia's diary, and Arthur's last letter from his father. To get your copy, just head over to his website at mpfitzgerald.art. You'll also get free updates on future audiobooks and more. We hope you have enjoyed A Happy Bureaucracy by M.P. Fitzgerald, narrated by Gary Bennett. Text copyright 2019 by M.P. Fitzgerald. Production copyright 2021 by M.P. Fitzgerald.
Music by Dust Mice, available on all streaming services and dustmice.bandcamp.com.